Joining us on the stage, moderator Gary Yarbrough.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? We good? Back again for another Infocom. How does that feel?
We're up on stage.
It really feels great. I want to introduce my colleagues for this particular session. We're going to start to my left.
Hi, I'm Frank Padikkala. I'm a technical sales engineer at Audinate.
Kev Talbot, solutions architect at Involve.
And I'm Jenny Hicks, the head of technology for the Midwich group.
Gary Yarbrough, infrastructure operations manager for the Northrop Grumman enterprise. So before we get started, you'll see a QR code on the screen behind me. If you scan that code, you would be able to send in a question for us, and we can possibly get to that and read that question. But we're going to start this particular conversation off with trending AV network with IT. Are we seeing any kind of change in the AV world when it comes to IT protocols? I'm going to start with Frank.
I don't think it's so much as a change as so much as an adoption, because the common things that we're seeing today with managed services and cloud, we've been seeing for a while now. But what has caused, due to the last 2 years and supply chain issues and the pandemic, is that manufacturers, integrators, and AV users in general have become very creative about how they do their solutions. So I think there's more of an adoption of it, which means there's more education, more skills, and in general, a convergence, I hate to use the term, but a convergence of these technologies to facilitate audiovisual systems.
Okay. Kev, you got a comment for us for that?
I think there is the trend, the kit's being pushed on us in terms that it's something new, it's something shiny, and it's what a lot of the manufacturers out here are now trying to sell. Mm-hmm. I think the biggest issue isn't the technology, though, it's the message and how we're getting it across.
Okay.
So I think the trend is the kit's coming, like it or not, but how we're doing it, how we're discussing it, how we're educating people, maybe not.
Okay. Do you Jen, give us a comment on that?
Yes, I think it's, it differs a little bit by category and segment. For me, AV over IP is a technology evolution in our industry that is happening no matter what. So there will come a point, there has to come a point where legacy point-to-point kit and HD-based T does start to disappear, and we see IP being the only way that we use for signal distribution. But interestingly, if you look at other parts or other product segments that we have in this industry, they actually are much further ahead than we are in that category. So VoIP, as an example, was really easily accepted by the IT world, and we worked together. And video conferencing accelerated even more so, I think, by the pandemic and the cloud platforms. That's been welcomed as a business communications tool. But audio and video that's not for comms, no, the trend is happening. The kit is here, and it will sell, and it will overtake. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't say that we have fully converged in terms of IT and AV yet.
So I'm going to stay with you on this one. How do we get the IT world to get on board with AV over IP without a lot of kickback?
I wish I knew the answer to that question. What I often find quite interesting is that I think that the IT teams get a really bad rep for this, because we say it's them, they block us, they won't let us. Almost every install that I'm involved in is on a dedicated network. We are not putting this stuff on the LAN. But actually, when you go and speak to the end user teams, particularly where they have an in-house AV team, it's kind of the other way around, and the block is often coming from our AV engineers who are concerned about network changes having ripple effects that then render the AV unusable or flaky, and that actually is just as much of a problem as there being this resistance, shall we say, from IT teams to have it on the network. And I really don't think it's about bandwidth anymore. I think it is simply about and responsibility and who is going to be held responsible if there is a problem.
Okay, Frank, can you talk to that as well?
Yeah, so I have my perspective, as always, is going to be very different on this because I come from the camp where, I don't see a difference necessarily in audiovisual systems and IT, primarily as technologies. They're technologies that facilitate our requirements. And at the end of the day, the challenges that we have faced probably 50 years ago when we came up with that first monitor that you needed to install, and so you had to coordinate with your architect, a similar amount of coordination is required irrespective of what the knowledge domain is. And that level of transfer of information, I believe it's there, it's happening right now. The very fact that if you walk around this exhibit hall, you're going to see a lot more traditionally IT vendors exhibiting here. It's a good sign that there has largely been an adoption of the technologies that we're used to seeing. And in order to facilitate that, there are individuals like myself who built a career on being on both sides of the table, right? Okay. So there are lots of translators out there. There are very capable integrators out there. Manufacturers do an excellent job of spreading the whole gospel of IT, if you want to call it.
Okay. And Kev, I'm going at you. This came from the audience. How long will we see, or maybe before the AV IT world, what we're talking about, becomes standardized, if any?
Standardized? Fear, not in my lifetime.
Okay.
I think the problem is, as you mentioned, with VoIP, there was a standard. SIP became the standard. There isn't that yet. Sending information over the network, yes, is standardized to some extent. But from an AV protocol element, there isn't. And until, as an industry, and if we converge properly, as you said, with IT, everybody gets together and agrees this way, I don't see a standard ever happening. And frankly, the biggest reason, manufacturers want to make money. And it's always easier if you buy all their kit.
Getting both teams on board to standardize the AV and the IT platforms, it's very much necessary because that's where we're going, like Jen said. It's not going to change. We're not going to be the ones implementing the next protocol. It's manufactured, like with Frank and his product of what he sells. He's been doing it for years. So this is something that's going to happen, but yet we get so much resistance. In my world, I deal with a security block of anything getting on the network is not going to happen. I may have an audience full of people who may think the same. If they deal in the DoD world, classified world, they're going to have issues no matter what it is, but yet it can work. So moving forward with trends and trying to understand that the AV IP protocol, is this why we may need more, or will remote management from a lot of manufacturers creating remote management tools for companies, do you see that taking a hit if we don't go that direction? I'll start with Kevin.
Yeah, I think from a remote management point of view, you've got, like I said, we've got IT companies, we've got AV companies. They're managing their own kit. Now, IT management is pretty good that you can manage switch, irrelevant of who from, but can you use AV manufacturer A's management software to manage AV manufacturers B? No. Can you get AV manufacturer A managing their kit and then network manufacturer A? I don't see it anytime soon. I'd love to say it's coming next week, genuinely, and I think we all would. Mm-hmm. But I think until they're all standard, I'm very skeptical, but I want it, and I think we all want it.
Okay, Jen, what you think?
I think that's exactly the point. It's about who takes responsibility and ownership of the full system, and that's probably why we've seen, there's been some early talk about standardizing and it hasn't worked, or then something else crops up and you go, well, if your story is interoperability, how do we already have multiple standards. Everybody's competing to kind of get that Dante effect, you know, the brand name that is synonymous with the technology that then sticks, and that hasn't happened for video. I think, you know, we've seen a lot of great stuff from SDVOE, and they put the technology on the map for us, and they're probably responsible for some of the growth that we've seen and that transition. But they haven't managed to convince the AV industry to go with it, and it comes down to who is at fault when you reach a point needing to troubleshoot a system. Who is going to take ownership and so on, and that falls to the integrator at the moment. But with products that say they're interoperable, it's so out of your control if you're at one end and another manufacturer is at the other end, and none of us can test everything. It's a saturated market now because everybody's jumped on this technology evolution. So there's a lot of mess to clear up. Whereas I think with the IT brands, they've always worked in this way. They have always worked towards interoperability because everything needs to communicate together. It's literally networked. And that's just how they're conditioned to working. We're not. We come from a point-to-point legacy.
Okay. Frank, can you add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, I know we spend a lot of time talking about standards, but I will say this, the whole concept of standardization is a little overrated, and kind of we look at the IT industry and we say, oh, they've had standards for a long time. The fact of the matter is, the same issues that plague us also plague the IT industry. There's switch deployments from two separate manufacturers. We talk about the same simple protocol, but the way they're implemented are different, right? So you have the nuances of these so-called standards happening everywhere. So I think we need to dial it back. You know, when we're looking at trends and we're trying to understand where things stand and where things are going to be a few years from now, it's what's driving this, right? Obviously, user experience is critical, right? How people do things, and the user experience goes not just the users of the system, but the people who are maintaining them and people who are managing them, the support teams. And so we take it back to what is the driving factor. And for me, when I started off, I was talking about cloud and managed services, which kind of also talks about the remote management tools that we're seeing today. I think at its core, ease of use, ease of accessibility, and it's critical to also be secure, right? At the end of the day, nobody wants to be liable for whatever loss of data in whatever form that is. So some of these things are going to take precedence over our supposed needs, and they will decide on what exactly it is. I can say this, I mean, I come at it from an IT perspective. The whole concept of security by obfuscation and saying that I'm going to do things on my own network is not going to stick around for a long time, right? If you have a device that has a networkable port on it, at some point your IT departments are going to clamp down and say, I need to see what that is. So at that point, it's important for users of the system, be it AV departments, manufacturers, integrators, vendors, whoever that is, we need to be able to communicate with them and say, yes, we can put it on your network, but this is how you do it, right? And that transparency can solve a lot of problems.
Well, that for me goes back to, like I said at the start, it's education. There always feels at the minute that you've got two sides of the fence with AV and IT, and we're like this. And it makes no sense.
We don't have to be.
It's a simple conversation. In one side, they're the experts in the other. You'd never go to a Sparky and say, I want you to wire a plug this way. Why would I tell the IT team to manage their network that way? We should be going to them and saying, okay, you want to do this, well, here's what this product will do, how it does it, why it does it, let's work to make it happen. And as long as them conversations take place and the education happens, it can go a hell of a lot smoother. As we said before, we maybe even hit this utopia, we'll at least have a happy middle ground.
I think that will naturally happen. So if you think now, we've got a really big sort of generational gap in the workforce at the moment, but gradually we will have IT personnel and in-house IT teams coming through that are joining an industry that is aware of these products. You know, we didn't have this. So our current IT personnel are saying, well, I don't know anything about this. I haven't trained. I don't understand it. I don't want it on my network. It should be separate, because that's how it's always been done. But the new generation, the younger staff that are coming in, will understand that we have the products, and because of the IT vendors moving into AV in the UC space, you know, we're blending with some of these staff and youngsters already. So I think it will naturally happen. We could speed it up if we were able to infiltrate some of the network education that these IT personnel go through. I don't know how we do it, but in any sort of computer science or networking qualification, the AV comes into it.
What do you think of this comment? This is a comment from my audience, and it says, have your AV department report into IT department, and it will bring the AV and IT departments together to standardize internally. What do you think of that comment? Let's start with Frank.
Oh, I mean, I don't need to say much. I completely agree, right? Because at its core, seeing audiovisual technologies as IT, and please do not misinterpret this as saying that there's a hierarchy involved. It's just that we're all technology, and IT seems to have some form of a management already in place. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. It's about cross-platform training, and here's what you do. I mean, you look around, the manufacturers, the industry in general over the last few years have been aggressively hiring from each of these industries. You will see audiovisual personnel in the traditional IT companies as well. It's happening both ways, right? There's no need to be combative about it. It's just the evolution of technology. I mean, just look at where broadcast is. A few years ago, broadcasters wouldn't have dreamt of having the things that they have on the IP network today, but today it's converging. There's a lot of foundational information that's common to everyone. We all deal with the same challenges. It's time to find that common ground and build it out.
It's a technology department.
Yes.
You want to call it the IT department, that's fine, but
it's technology.
Nobody is an IT specialist.
Nope.
You're a network specialist, you're a security specialist, database. Throw AV into the mix if you want to. You're a technology department.
Right.
So all working together has to be the way forward.
Okay. Jen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it would solve so many problems across the industry much wider than this if we could, in essence, sort of rebrand, I guess, to be that, to be technology, to be one team, one industry.
Okay.
And we would attract talent easier. We talk about all these great people in the IT industry and how do we get our AV message out. Well, there's one that we work together. But is it that we are so concerned about retaining our AV status in this industry that we know and we love, that there is a nervousness of, how far and much we're being infiltrated by some of these big brand names that historically come from something that we called IT. So I think it's going to be difficult to achieve, but absolutely, I mean, them being the same team, reporting into the team, having that shared responsibility, it's the answer.
I have a comment from another audience member asking best way or path solution to AV over your regular network versus creating a virtual or different LAN VLAN. I know how I feel about that, and I've been trying to get that way for a long time to the VLAN world. I want all my AV on a VLAN. It's just too much going on with the network from a security level that I just can't control. So, Jen, since you take us home, bring us home with that.
So I'd say we see that almost taken one if the installs are on a completely separate, dedicated network, set up as if it were HD-based T. It may as well not be AV over IP kit half the time.
Okay.
So it's definitely, at a user level, that is their preference, that it stays off of the LAN entirely.
Yeah. Okay, Kevin, real quick, we running a little bit out of time.
So the simplest answer is it depends, and it really depends on the business itself and how they're set up. We all work with customers that it's an absolute no-go because of the security on their network and the way that they're built. It's a fear factor.
Yep.
Some it's very simple to say, okay, I can converge it on the network because I'm talking about 10 endpoints that is doing very little. But then when you're thinking I'm putting 10,000 on there and now I've got 600 switches and I don't understand the way it's going to go, some of them saying, well, again, fear, let's maybe keep it separate. But I do think, again, it's an education to get us to. Converge can work. It's not that it shouldn't work, it can work.
Cool.
There's just got to be a lot of conversations to get it to work.
Cool. Frank, take us home on this one, 40 seconds.
I mean, virtual networks, you got to take it a step further too, right? I mean, you have high-end security, you have zero trust networks. So the challenge is designing for what your customer needs. So if you just need an HDMI cable, you can do it with an HDMI cable. But if there's a requirement where you need to put it on the network, there are ways to do that. And it's there. It's already there. It's just about understanding the technology and designing to have the best user experience possible.
Guys, thank you so much for your input on today's session. Guys, we're going to be standing over there for about maybe 5-10 more minutes. But thank you for joining us today for this enlightening experience. And welcome back to InfoComm 2022. Have a good day.